Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're building a completely holistic guide to mastering productivity. Think of it kind of like a hierarchy of needs, but for your work and study life. We're going to build this thing from the ground up, starting with the actual physical space you're sitting in right now, all the way up to the cognitive habits that literally rewire how your brain stores information.
But hey, before we start building that ultimate environment, I've got to ask you a bit of a provocative question. Do you rely on highlighting or rereading to study? Be honest, because if you do, you are definitely not alone. But you might be falling straight into what we call the highlighter trap.
Now, what's really interesting about this is you should really think of your highlighter as a bear trap. I know, it feels completely harmless, right? But highlighting actually floods your brain with excessive information. It causes this massive cognitive overload. And worse, because it feels immediately productive in the moment, it gives you this completely false sense of mastery over the material. You genuinely feel like you've learned it, but, well, you haven't.
So here's our roadmap out of that trap. First up, we'll break down this illusion of competence. Then, we're going to build our physical foundation by crafting a cozy workspace and properly lighting your room. From there, we'll master the Pomodoro technique, and finally, we'll cap the whole thing off with some serious, science-backed study strategies.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the illusion of competence.
It is officially time to debunk some of our most deeply ingrained, comforting learning myths. Look, passive reading and highlighting, they're familiar, they're cozy, and they require very little friction. But they create a total illusion. Genuine mastery, on the other hand, involves active retrieval and self-testing. And yeah, that is slightly uncomfortable. It forces your brain to actually work. Simply seeing content multiple times over and over does not build robust memory traces. It just creates a thin veneer of knowledge.
And we actually know this definitively thanks to some major research from back in 2013. John Dunlosky and his team conducted this incredibly comprehensive meta-analysis of study techniques. And their findings? They proved that highlighting is actually one of the absolute least effective methods out there. It offers basically negligible benefits, and it actively distracts you from developing any kind of cohesive understanding of the subject. Wild, right?
All right, moving on to Section 2, crafting a cozy workspace.
So before we can go and optimize those cognitive methods, we really have to construct our physical foundation. I mean, you can't expect your brain to zero in and focus if your body is uncomfortable or your environment is just pure chaos. Drawing on some really great insights from the Autonomous Design blog, a cozy desk setup isn't just about looking cute. It's about creating a space where you feel calm, supported, and just totally in your element. Aesthetics and comfort. Things like having a good ergonomic chair, or even just hiding your visual clutter with a cable tray, they actually reduce mental friction and anxiety. Order invites calm.
So how do you actually achieve this? You've got to design for the senses. Mix smooth finishes, like maybe a wooden desktop or a cool stone organizer, with really soft textures. Think a plush rug or some velvet cushions. Maybe add a mood board for some visual flow, and toss in a flame effect diffuser or a flameless candle. Seriously, that subtle flicker literally tricks your brain into feeling safe and grounded. It creates this beautifully lived-in, multisensory environment that just massively enhances your focus.
To really bring this to life, let's look at student vlogger Amira Ritchie. She shared this super relatable story where she specifically sets aside time for a Sunday reset. She goes in and resets her space with fall arrangements and candles just to completely decompress, lower her anxiety, and kind of romanticize her environment before diving headfirst into a brutally demanding week of advanced biochemistry classes. For her, that space isn't just a desk, it's a tool to actively manage her stress.
Which brings us nicely to Section 3, lighting your study room.
Okay, so the space is physically comfortable. Now, you absolutely must prevent eye strain. So the crucial point here is a spec called CRI, or Color Rendering Index. According to the lighting experts over at Kuhome, you ideally want a desk lamp with a CRI of 90 or higher, paired with a 4000 Kelvin color temperature. That specific combo ensures text edges remain incredibly crisp, and it stops your highlighter colors from turning to mud. It is a total lifesaver for your eyes during those marathon reading sessions.
But here's the thing. A single overhead ceiling light, it rarely cuts it for a productive small study setup. You actually need 3 distinct layers of lighting. Step 1 is ambient light, something like a flush mount LED. Step 2 is task lighting, a solid desk lamp delivering around 300 to 500 lux directly onto your reading surface. And Step 3 is accent lighting, like maybe a subtle light strip tucked under a floating shelf. Layering these 3 elements means you can dim the overall room while keeping your absolute focus area bright and energized.
And you can actually automate all of this with smart scenes. A focus scene utilizes that crisp 4000K light we talked about, but after sunset, you can trigger a wind-down scene that shifts the ambient light to a much warmer 2700K at around 30% brightness to really support restfulness. Interestingly, that warm 2700K trick, it's the exact same secret used by YouTube creator Half Finished to get that incredibly cozy cinematic look in his video color grades. It's a direct signal to your brain that it's finally time to settle in.
Let's move on up to Section 4, Mastering the Pomodoro Technique.
Because look, you can have the absolute best lit desk in the entire world, but without time management, it's pretty much useless. And this brilliantly illustrates why. I mean, let's face it, the sheer crushing dread of staring down an unstructured 4-hour study session is enough to make literally anyone procrastinate. Invented by Francesco Cirillo back in the 1980s, the Pomodoro method beats that procrastination by having you think in tomatoes, or pomodoros, rather than hours. You just work for a short 25-minute sprint, take a quick 5-minute break, and then after 4 of those cycles, you take a much longer restorative break. It totally prevents burnout and builds massive, massive consistency.
But to make it really work, you've got to follow 3 golden rules. First, break down those intimidating, complex projects that take more than 4 sprints into much smaller steps. Second, group tiny little tasks together, like paying rent and sending off a quick email. Just lump those into a single sprint. Third, and honestly most importantly, the Pomodoro is completely indivisible. Once that timer is set, it must ring. No checking your phone, no getting up for a snack, no stopping early.
All right, Section 5, Science-Backed Study Strategies.
Finally, we have arrived at the very peak of our productivity hierarchy. Your room is set, your time is perfectly managed. Now, how do you actually retain the information? Well, it all comes down to 2 absolute powerhouse concepts: active recall and spaced repetition. So, instead of just passively consuming things, you are actively retrieving information from your memory at these systematically increasing intervals. Doing this directly combats the psychological forgetting curve, and it builds incredibly robust memory traces in your brain.
And you implement this by making a pretty fundamental shift in your habits. You trade the highlighter for digital flashcards. You trade the endless rereading for practice tests. And you trade passive summarizing for self-explanation, where you literally teach the concept out loud to an empty room. These tactics shift you entirely from that dangerous passive illusion we talked about, straight into genuine, active engagement.
Let's look at a real-world result of this in action. Remember Amira, that student vlogger we mentioned earlier? Well, she used exactly this method to score a 98% on her advanced biochem final. She actually dumped her lecture notes into an AI to generate 200 custom practice questions. Then she used an app called Ankai to create digital flashcards, specifically using a feature called image occlusion. This let her block out parts of an image so she could actively memorize those crazy complex metabolic pathways. Yeah, it was hard work, for sure, but man, it yielded undeniable results.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Will you ditch your highlighter today and rebuild your routine from the ground up? You now have the complete hierarchy of productivity needs. Everything from a beautifully sensory-rich desk setup all the way to active recall. The tools for true mastery are literally right in front of you. But the real question is, now that you know the bear trap is there, are you still going to step in it?